Hi there. Welcome to the Luxury Meets podcast, a new kind of business podcast where we take you around the world to interview global leaders and get into their personal stories about chasing excellence across health, wellness, beauty, travel, sport, hospitality, culinary, beverage, retail, cannabis, design, and so much more. I'm your host, Jed Wexler, founder and CEO of LMCC. In this episode, I'll be talking to the brilliant team from Adweek, Will Lee, CEO, Sammy Lambert, Director of Social Media, and Terry Stanley, Senior Editor, about the future of content, ad campaigns, events, and yes, even cannabis. And now, sit back and enjoy episode 1, Luxury Meets Advertising. Please welcome Will Lee, CEO of Adweek, Sammy Lambert, Director of Social Media at Adweek, and Terry Stanley, the Senior Editor at Adweek. And Will, I wanted to kick off the conversation with you because it really does seem, especially lately, that Adweek is on this cutting edge, transforming how media companies connect with their audiences, their business audiences across events, digital, podcast, social print. Really looks like you're leading the way in this area and providing this roadmap. Can you kind of expand on that and the vision, for the company as you see it?
Sure. Thanks for having us, Jed. I think it's a really interesting moment for Adweek in a lot of different ways because we're turning 45 this year, and we've always been an important and authoritative source for the advertising and marketing industry. But I think the advertising and marketing and growth and media and technology industries are at a very specific moment of dynamism and change. And I think that Adweek should be the media center of gravity for all of this change. And I'd like us to not just be the best trade publication and media company for the advertising and marketing industry, but really to be able to span a much broader group of business stakeholders who are going to need Adweek to help, as someone put it to me, unmess the mess, because there is a lot of mess in this world right now. And I think there's a real opportunity for us to help people clarify, to curate, and also to know where to how to spend their time and their intellectual energy.
And speaking of this special moment, I've seen you mention that you're building this faster, fresher, more vibrant, reinvented Adweek, and there are a lot of pieces to that. Can you speak to the moment and what reinvent and what fresher, more vibrant means? Because it is emanating from the business, as an outsider looking in.
Sure. So, I think it all starts with we're a content company at our core, and we drive the conversation through editorial, through our news, through our events, obviously, and through the community that we have built and are continuing to build. But ultimately, you're looking at two of the people who help really drive the conversation. Terry with her incredible reporting, Sammy with the way that she tells the stories of the industry, but also the things that we're working on through social channels. And I think that that's really where it all begins. And I think we've hired a new editor-in-chief. We have a new chief content officer. And I think that is a real signal that we are taking Adweek in a very fresh and I'd say new and hopefully much more essential direction. And I think we just want to be fundamentally much more essential. And as I like to put it very specifically, we want to have a bigger share of a media executive, an advertising executive, a marketing executive, a greater share of their media diet.
That's a perfect transition to talk to Sammy. Will, you did say at a recent Next Tech event. I think you were talking to the COO of Reddit that we were in a post social media era. Aside from giving social media directors everywhere pause, what does that mean? What is your take on that, Sammy? From I guess a future trends, and what are we looking at here?
Yeah, I think for a while, if you worked for a brand or for media, you would see a lot of like click conversions that went from social to your website or to an article or to a podcast or to a video. And because of the way people interacting with brands online has changed, because of the way the algorithms have changed, that's just not where we're at anymore. So I wouldn't give it shouldn't make anybody worry who works in social. So much of people's time is on social. It's just the way that your brand interacts with them is just going to look different, and what your bosses or what the company should expect from your social media pages should be different. I think it's the perfect place to foster community. I think it's a perfect place to create conversation and to get people involved, and eventually it'll lead them down the funnel to be a subscriber or to come to an event or to click on an article. Or there's so many touch points that you can't really track as you used to. But that doesn't mean that it's not important, because as we know, most people are spending a majority of their time on different social media platforms, and they are scrolling their days away. So it's still really important to have a presence there. It's just how we um, track and look at the KPIs that are a little bit different.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. Sammy put it really well, but I think that when I talked about post social, and I'm not sure that Jen Wong, the the COO of Reddit, would have agreed with that, or frankly post search. But I think that really what I was talking about was media companies, and particularly digital media companies' reliance on social platforms to drive audiences that are monetizable, right? I think the platforms like TikTok and Reels, Instagram, and so forth are just as important as they ever have been. But it's just a different relationship that we'll have going forward.
Yeah, and then I kind of have a two-parter for Sammy and Terry. Who is consuming your Adweek content on one side, and on the other, what does it mean for brands? What should brands be doing, Sammy? How can they be effective on the platforms that where you are such an expert in?
Yeah, I think it's hard when you're in the marketing world and in the marketing bubble to realize what people's news feeds or for you pages or pages actually look like. But when you're a brand on social, you're not competing with other brands on social. When you're a publication, you're not competing with the other publications. You're competing with everything else that's on people's pages. So, like, if a brand is to show up on my Instagram feed, you're competing with my friend who just got married and uh, I don't know, like babies that are being born and like cats and stuff like that. Like, you're competing with the people that are in my bubble in addition to any other brands or publications that I might be following because I align with their content. So I think first of all, it's hard to get out of that mentality when you work in media or for a brand or for social. It's like you need to be creating content that's either educational or informative and that people want to share and interact with. I think we get kind of caught up with like things being on brand or things representing things and blah, 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 everything internal in your company. But it's like, these people don't care about that. They just want to consume a piece of content that they can share and that they enjoy. And they will follow your page if you are providing that. So I think in the future, we're going to see a lot more. I think it's going to go into more like longer form social series that brands are like sponsoring that can connect back to things that their company are doing. But it has to be something that people actually want to engage with, if that makes sense. I don't know if that answered your question, but
It does. I mean, it's fascinating because it's these our feeds are personal. What you're saying is, if I'm following a skincare brand or a pet food brand, it's not that brand is not necessarily competing with other skincare and pet brands. They're competing with the other things that I like and that are delivered to me
yeah,
by the algorithm. And so it just feels very personal. And then
yeah.
my other question is, in terms of campaigns on social and beyond, who is doing a good job? notice, Liquid Death and Elf is, is that something that shows up on?
That was a sick collaboration.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, skincare is having a big moment right now across social, for better or for worse. I don't know. There's a whole talk about tweens and getting into skincare, and that's a bigger conversation, but they are having a big moment. I really like what Topicals is doing right now on Instagram, and they're doing a different kind of brand trip as well, like these influencer trips. I think they're doing something really, really cool. I really like also The Cut. The Cut is really good across social of like storytelling. Those are two examples. Elf is also doing an amazing job. They have Super Bowl commercials. They work with Jennifer Coolidge. They just did this collaboration with Liquid Death, which is like the most unlikely collaboration, which I love. These crazy unlikely collabs.
Yeah.
It's sold out. Liquid Death, if people don't know, it's a water company.
Right.
And Elf is a more accessible beauty company. And then they did this collaboration where it was like Kiss style makeup, like black and white. I don't know. Terry definitely wrote about it, right? And Terry is the queen of reporting about these collaborations. So yeah, she can talk about it. But it was great, and it worked so well on social. 2 million likes on TikTok already, their video about it. That's crazy.
Wild. I mean, Terry, how, you're covering all these brand campaigns and your, ad campaigns. Can you describe, before we get into that, your editorial beat a little bit? And you've been with the company, I think, for about 17 years, and I'm sure you've seen quite a few changes, transformations. So what is your beat?
Your math is only slightly off, Jed. My first byline for Adweek was in 1994. I was 5 years old.
By my math, that's 3 years. So it's like, you were in kindergarten when you started cranking out like top level like journalism. So
what can I say? I was a child prodigy.
So yeah, tell us more about your beat.
If you do a quick Google search under my byline and Adweek, it comes up with 34,500 entries, which might be a slightly high for a byline count. But yeah, that's Google. My beats at Adweek are fairly numerous. By my own hand, I cover cannabis, I cover plant-based food, I cover booze-free booze, I cover a lot of booze, proper, the fortified kind. And I also write a lot of the new campaigns across creativity. That could be any consumer category that we cover. So it's a pretty vast sort of set of beats, actually.
Now, what are some of the campaigns, that really stand out to you that you've written about recently? They're quite a bit, in the cannabis space, in the Super Bowl space, experiential, Oscars related. So what's really standing out to you, from an editorial, standpoint?
I choose my stories carefully because we have to be selective. We can't possibly cover everything. It's a fire hose coming at us all the time. But we curate this coverage, and I look at everything from an Adweek point of view. What is the Adweek piece of this story, or the potential Adweek piece of this story? And is this something that serves our readers? Is this something that they're going to be interested in? Will they learn something from it? So I'm very choosy about what I cover. And some of the campaigns lately, as it has already come up, Liquid Death and Elf collaboration, Liquid Death is the gift that just keeps on giving. Every quarter, they do something. And it is always worth taking a look, and very often it is worth covering, because I think they understand that, exactly as Sammy has just been describing, they know their audience. And I think they also know how they can expand their audience by entertaining rather than marketing to people. They were founded by a former advertising executive, and they have a lot of very creative people there. So that's simply one brand that I think is doing it right, because they have the the buyer, I would say the person in mind when they craft these programs. They're not speaking to people as consumers necessarily. They're sort of trying to speak to them as friends. But that's just one brand. I see a lot of brands doing creative things these days. I believe irony is dead in advertising, but thankfully for me, humor is not.
That is very quotable. So Terry and Will, what is the Adweek point of view, and Sammy? What if you when you define it behind closed doors? What is the Adweek point of view?
There must be an advertising and marketing perspective. That's first, because of our readership. But at the same time, we have the room. Maybe I'll just say I take the liberty of treating these stories a little more like a business story, but also a consumer story. I am trying to marry those two things so that our audience, I am absolutely speaking their language, and I'm talking about, for instance, a brand's use of media and how they intend to amplify this campaign. But also, I want that story to have a consumer perspective so that, let's just say, someone who reads entertainment publications or someone who reads the LA Times or the Washington Post would look at that story and it would be something that they would understand it, they would perhaps hopefully be interested in it. So I am trying to serve those two masters.
I mean, it is a fascinating hybrid. It makes it the content pop out, and does make it more accessible. Go ahead, Sammy.
Yeah, I think anyone who works in advertising or the marketing industry, it's like we're creating content, and not even creating content, but gathering the important information. And our journalists are so great at getting scoops and talking to people who are in power and the people who work for the people that are in power, and really getting information that you can't get anywhere else. And I think that's what really differentiates Adweek from other publications. But the cool thing is, almost everything can be marketing and advertising. So, like, besides the scoops and like this like cutting edge journalism and investigative journalism that's happening, you're also getting general coverage of what's happening in the creator economy. Everyone's working with creators now. Everything's a brand. Everything is marketing. Like, each human being right now, because of capitalism, is almost a brand and is selling something. And we kind of get to cover everything from like, yeah, Instagram, television, sustainability, cannabis, like it's so far reaching that although our target audience seems to be quite small, because it's like, okay, you have to work in advertising. Really, I think this is information that everybody is really actually interested in. And if that means that they follow us on Instagram or they subscribe to our content or they attend an event, I think it actually can reach so many more people. And I think that's what, yeah, Will is doing. I'm curious to know Will's answer, actually. I would love to know, because you're newer, and you think about this like all day, every day.
Yeah, well, I think there's a very prominent CMO actually very early on. I said, what is the value of Adweek to you? And what he said to me, and just for context, a very large fast food company, and he said to me, it's a combination of heart, science, math, and culture, right? And I think what Terry and Sammy are talking about is very much in that vein, which is to say, yes, we obviously we cover a lot about creativity and how brands express themselves, but we also want to cover the outcomes, the business outcomes, because we are a business publication, right? And a business resource, right? So that's part of it, and that's more the science and the math. But then there's this other element that I think is part of our real sort of secret sauce, which is that the place of advertising and marketing in the cultural zeitgeist, if you will, that is a very important part of what we do. And that can span not just business people, but the consumer, and really just kind of the broader audience. And I think that's where you've heard me say, I've been reading Adweek since I was 11 years old. And at that point, advertising was really starting to define the cultural zeitgeist. So if you talk about 1984, the Apple ad, or you talk about the Wendy's ads or the FedEx guy in the 80s. I mean, these are all very much cultural touch points, and they tell you a little bit about what was happening in the world at the time, or a lot about what was happening in the world at the time. And so for me, I think that's what I got from Adweek as a younger person, and as I've developed an affinity for Adweek over the years. I think that the combination, that pretty magical combination, is what we do better than anybody else.
And interesting about the cultural piece, that looks like it extends to the events that you do. And Sammy, you just programmed Social Media Week, and that.
Well, it's happening in 2 weeks.
Oh,
so it's
okay.
About to happen.
So,
yeah. Well, I'm
I see.
actively helping program it, but it hasn't happened yet. It's going to happen.
Well, let's, you are on the leading edge of how companies connect with their audience via events, and seeing how this cultural piece mixes in with that. Can you speak to your approach to these events? And they seem to be more numerous, more differentiated, more hybrid, as Terry says, in this business / consumer who is an enthusiast in this category or in this area. So, and you're doing real-time content during events throughout the world. So, Sammy, can you speak to the events that you work on for the company?
Yeah, I feel really fortunate. I've been to almost every single Adweek event in the last 2 years, which is like almost one a month. And not a lot of people can say that except for probably our events team. So it's been really cool to see all of the different events, from tentpole events like Brand Week and Social Media Week to things like we just had a new event called Adweek X, or we activate at Cannes, or I had to go to Super Bowl. What's really cool about these events is not only the networking opportunities they provide. I think people love to be in person, and there's something so cool about bringing our audience into the real world and having them meet each other and meet us. And I've seen people's names on LinkedIn or on Instagram, and I'm like, oh my God, like I see you interacting with our content all the time, and now I get to meet you, and then I get to have bring the online conversations offline. But we really have access to, and I will forever be grateful for this, we have access to like the most important people in business, like full stop. Like we're bringing in CEOs and CMOs and like big leaders from the biggest companies in the whole world, and bringing them on stage and asking them truly like really important questions that they don't really get asked other places. And to hear that answer in person is amazing. And of course you get a full 30 minutes of them talking, but then also as a social strategy to like make sure we're highlighting important points of what they're saying and bringing it online for anyone who can attend is what I do love to do. And then of course we do like some fun, silly videos outside of that, especially when we have big talent come in, because now you see like these big celebrities, they're all starting businesses. These big content creators and influencers, they're all starting businesses. Like they're part of our community too. And I think that's a cool way to bridge the gap between advertising and entertainment. But yeah, bringing all of that together, our events are awesome. I've never, ever seen anything like it. I probably never will again. Like, I don't know if anyone's doing anything that's similar. And if you haven't been to an event, I would come. Jed, you've been to a few, right?
Yes, definitely. And Will, when you came on board, was that something that you took a long look at, and how the return on your events, and how you do events, and the strategy for those?
Yeah, so I'll echo what Sammy said, which is to say I think we have a very sophisticated and very engaging events business. The flip side of that is that it's hard. I mean, you know this as well as I do, right? Events are really is an extremely difficult business. It is requires a tremendous amount of planning, and the execution is really difficult. We actually have a pretty small team. I think most people would be pretty surprised by how many people we actually employ at the company to do it. But I would say that our differentiation, and the other thing is, as I think we've all discovered, post-COVID, there is a tremendous amount of demand, which means that many other people are getting into the event business, and that creates a lot of competitive noise for us. On the other hand, I think we do have a differentiation in that I'd like to think that we deliver a pretty significant return, whether it's for our sponsors, whether it's for our attendees. And what you're going to see from us over the next, year plus, year and a half, really, is a real focus on defining the value of the event for the attendee and delivering on that, over delivering, hopefully, but really being very specific. Like if you come and you need to make 15 new contacts through networking, you need to take back 10 data points that are going to help you make your case for investment to your chief financial officer or your chief operating officer or your CEO. And you meet, you hear or meet or see 5 things that you've never thought of before. Like that we need to be very explicit about, because the problem is for a CMO or for an agency person or for an ad tech vendor, there's so many more now than there were even 3 years ago, 5 years ago. And so we just have to define the competitive advantage that you're going to get from coming to an Adweek event versus anybody else's. And it's hard. And so it's a great challenge. And as Sammy notes, we have great people coming to our events. The problem is they have a much broader spectrum of places they could go. Some people allure people with the fact that it's in Aspen or it's in, on some Caribbean island. And I don't think that's how we win. How we win is delivering more value, like every moment, every hour, every day that we bring people together.
And are you saying, this is more high touch and it's related to attendee mapping? Sammy, maybe you can speak to that as well, because you're creating real-time connections.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in what we provide, and the attendees definitely have so many takeaways from like the day or a few days that they spend with us, if that's from meeting fellow attendees or from what they're hearing on stage. Yeah, I wouldn't mind going to Aspen, but I don't think it makes a huge difference because I've gone to LA and London and like the of Miami, but it hasn't really the location has never made a difference for the actual event for me.
On the return.
Unless like spend my time there and outside of work, but that's not the point of the event. And like you can just travel on your time off. So I don't think it's made a huge difference. I do have to say for Social Media Week, which is coming up, or April 9th to 11th, because I'm not sure when this is airing, that's already sold out. So whatever we did there to get people to come has already worked. I'm like so proud of that. And we have Meg the Stallion coming, who was just on our cover last week. And it's cool to see that there's a lot of social media conferences and a lot going on. And it's cool to see that it's sold out so early. And now let's just hope we can deliver everything that everyone's expecting. But I think we will. I'm excited.
No, thanks for that. And I want to go back to something that Terry said as part of her beat. If we can sidetrack a little bit. Speaking of cannabis, why did you add that to your beat? And as a company, it seems like this looks like something we should all be keeping an eye on, a consumer segment, a global potential retail phenomenon. When did you add it to the beat and why? Really? It's fascinating.
Probably more than 5 years ago, because I could see that in the state by state march of the Green Rush, this was going to become a much bigger issue than it was at the time. It's now a $30 billion industry, and it got a shout out in the most recent State of the Union address. So not a lot of other businesses did. It's a fascinating area to cover. There are certainly legacy marketers in that business, but there are also lots of people, mainly from more the ad agency world, who have now gone into cannabis or the creative industries. There are some classically trained CPG marketers there as well. they are often quite surprised at all the restrictions on them when they get there. So they have been less successful than the more creative industries that have gravitated to cannabis as marketing executives. It's just a fascinating, fast-growing area, and I thought it would be a great thing for us to cover, and it is going to continue to be. There have been some tough times for that business. Obviously, federal prohibition is still looms large, but we're talking about right now rescheduling. That's what Biden has proposed. There are rumblings that something may even happen before 420. I'm keeping a close eye on that.
Of course.
I kind of don't expect the DEA to just instantly say, it's okay now. We've been fighting this for decades, but it's all right now. I think it may take a little more time, but there's some scuttlebutt about 420. So perhaps we'll have news on the rescheduling and taking cannabis out of Schedule 1, where it has been with heroin, and putting it into Schedule 3.
And taking it out of the shadows. I noticed you covered Magnolia Bakery, i.e. the famous Sex and the City bakery was rolling out a line of cannabis edibles, and that made it into Adweek's, into your coverage. So it is bubbling up, and I think Adweek is actually one of a small handful of quote mainstream publications that's in a sense normalizing what the business could be in this modern consumer, modern CPG, health and wellness, categories. So it's fascinating to see that continue and your commitment to it.
Oh, I was going to say, in addition to covering cannabis marketing, which is its own fascinating area, I'm always on the lookout for those crossovers. And there are an increasing number of those, not just partnerships and collaborations, but cannabis is being invited to places now that it absolutely would not have been even a few years ago. So I'm always on the lookout for those kinds of stories, i.e. Magnolia Bakery, getting invited to food and wine festivals and street fairs. And there are all kinds of ways that cannabis is now absolutely mainstream.
So I'll start with you on the trend snapshot, Terry. When are we going to see a cannabis Super Bowl ad? And what are you seeing in the industry, and what do you hope to see? So trend snapshot, spotlight, Terry Stanley.
We will not see a cannabis ad in the Super Bowl until federal prohibition has been lifted. It's as simple as that. People have tried and people have failed, including a couple of years ago, a really beautiful piece of creative work that was very focused on veterans and PTSD treatment from cannabis. That got shot down. It was hardly even branded. It was just a very lovely piece of work. People have tried, it's not worked because broadcasters are not open to that. They're not even going to have the conversation. When it is federally legal, we will have a Super Bowl ad.
Now, aside from cannabis, what are the trends in the industry that you're seeing or hope to see?
I think we saw a lot of things come out of the Super Bowl, the probably continuations of trends that we had already noticed, brands really trying to surround the consumer. So we obviously for many years now have seen brands release their ads ahead of time. They release teasers and trailers and they're not just doing that because everyone else does now. I mean, they are doing it because everyone else does. But there's a reason you want to get the most out of your content, especially when you're spending big bucks on the production. So we will continue to see that stretching of a campaign. It is not a one and done. It's seeding up before, dropping the campaign, releasing lots of additional pieces of content, many of them produced at the same time as the hero ads, but there's definitely a longer tail of stretching out those campaigns. I do think brands are still somewhat risk averse, in their creativity. We certainly saw that with the Super Bowl. It was a lot of mediocre creative, a lot of very forgettable. I mean, if you had to name 5 ads from the Super Bowl, could you?
Will, can you name? No. I no, and very expensive ads at that. And speaking of content and social, what are you seeing, Sammy? What do you hope to see? What's the trend snapshot for you?
Trend snapshot. We didn't touch upon this a lot, but I think brands are going to continue working with content creators. Influencer marketing is going to be big, but I do think things are going to have to get a little bit more creative and unique because it is such a saturated market right now that something's going to have to change because there is a little bit of fatigue from the consumer side. I also think we're going to head towards a more community driven social space. So I know right now, like discoverability is super high on TikTok and Instagram, and everyone's like creating content for everyone. But now I'm seeing the rise of platforms like Discord and Substack and things like WhatsApp communities and Instagram broadcast channels and Facebook groups. I think like going back to like niche communities is like going to be the new social strategy moving forward. I don't really know what that looks like yet, but I am seeing it more and more. So I do think brands will start hopping on creating more of this like niche community situation. And I also think we're going to see longer form content come back. So I know TikTok has just been pushing now to have like 10-minute videos. I think vlogging is going to come back. I think longer series. I think brands are going to start like sponsoring longer series that are either educational or informative. And that's all going to come back to social. So I do think we're going to see some changes. I'm excited for it. I mean, every new thing is kind of hard because you're like, how many more new things can we possibly handle? But people are creative, and we're giving kind of the power back to individual people. We're seeing that with the creator economy. Brands are kind of tapping in. It's like fun to see people being able to be creative and live their lives online and offline in a way that's different than we've ever seen before, and to not work for one brand, but work for themselves and then associate themselves with many brands, if that makes sense. So I'm excited to see what comes. I could be wrong. Social media is like, who knows what's going to happen. Now, I don't know. Donald Truth Social just went public. Like, who knows? I don't even want to talk about that stuff with X, like, and Threads. I can't even make a prediction, but I try to remain on the optimistic, positive, community building side of these things and not on that other side.
And a quick follow up, Sammy, are we and brands still working closely or differently with influencers? Are we entering another kind of golden era of how brands work with quote influencers?
Yeah, I think the next year or two, we're probably going to be in the golden era of influencer marketing. We just saw last year at Cannes, there were a handful of influencers and creators there. That was like the first time I really saw any sort of presence. I think this year they're going to ramp it up. Almost every brand, even if you're B2B, you can work with influencers. People like people. People have parasocial relationships with these content creators. Word of mouth marketing has always been the top. And this is just like a different level of word of mouth marketing because these influencers seem like people's friends. I don't think it's going to last super long because, again, people don't like advertisements, and the more that they can see through these influencer campaigns, the worse it's going to get. So I do think the creativity and like the intentionality of who you're partnering with, brand to influencer, is going to have to be so specific because if not, it's just all going to kind of implode. And I think it's a bigger conversation about consumerism and capitalism and being, who are we as people and how are we walking through life if everything we have is an ad? It's like super interesting to think about. And I don't know the longevity of it all, but it is the next few years, like you must be working with content creators if you want to make money as a brand, I think. So I think we're in the heyday of it at the moment.
Perfect. Thank you. And Will, what's next for the company? You know, where are you taking things? What are you guys launching? You know, where are you going?
Well, we've got a lot going on. Obviously, I think clearly we, again, as I said, we have a new editor in chief, Ryan Joe. We have a very new chief content officer, Zoe Ruderman, and I think that there's a lot to do on the just on the news, the journalism, the content side, and we really want to transcend the category, as I keep saying, and think about how we become more essential, not just to CMOs and to presidents of agencies, but to CEOs, to the rest of the C-suite. I think we really need to be an important, as I keep saying, center of gravity from an information standpoint when it comes to AI. I just attended a digital trust summit yesterday, and I think the level of disruption that will induce in the industry is going to be significant. And it's this, frankly, it's kind of this tidal wave that people are kind of only putting one, like they're kind of trying to avoid looking at too squarely in the eye. And I think that there is going to be significant disruption on the agency side, on the brand side. And I just think that we're going to be very much at the forefront of making people understand that. And then thirdly, I think, when we think about our product suite holistically, I think creating a continuum, the way I look at it is that Adweek should drive should really be defining and driving the conversation through content, experiences, and community. And what I think is important for us is to create a much more cohesive and coherent continuum between those three parts of the business. And if we do that properly, then I think you're really going to see how Adweek can grow, not just in influence, but frankly as a business.
Well, thank you all for joining us on this Adweek roundtable, and look forward to seeing you soon and definitely going to many of your events. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Sammy. Thank you, Terry. And we'll be in touch. A very big thank you once again to our guests for this episode, Adweek's Will Lee, Sammy Lambert, and Terry Stanley. I highly recommend you follow each of them on LinkedIn and, of course, all across social at Adweek. And stay tuned for our next episode, Luxury Meets What's Now, What's Next, an editor's roundtable with 3 pioneering journalists discussing what's really happening in food, wine, beauty, wellness, and culture. In the meantime, you can follow us at LMCC Show and visit lmccshow.com. And of course, subscribe, and you may even win a golden ticket to one of our award-winning events. See you next time.